Thank you for having me here tonight. Wow, this is such a great group of people. I know that you've already heard this, but this is a moment that you're going to remember forever. It really is special. And I guess next year, a lot of you are going off to college. Is that right? Who's going to college? Let's see you raise your hands. Who's going to the Naval Academy? Wait till after my story. We'll see if we can. I have the recruitment paperwork over here as well. Isn't it great? Let's get another hand for John. What a great event. Also, isn't it great to do the Lord's Prayer? That's not illegal yet. I'm feeling pretty good about this crowd. So, believe it or not, I've never played water polo. I know. I came from Liberty, South Carolina. Very small town. We did not have water polo. However, I have a tremendous amount of respect for you guys because at some point in my life, I did get in the water. So my sport of choice was wrestling. And we had, God bless his soul, he's in heaven now, Coach Garabadian. And Coach Garabadian was a Vietnam vet, and he used to walk around and hit us with a wiffle ball bat. This is back in the old days when you didn't have laws. He used to walk around on our stomachs with his construction boots because we'd be doing 6 inches or flutter kicks. Just made us tougher. But we never had a full team. We never did. And so we'd get in the back of his truck, literally, and drive to the next town. And our committed team, full of welts from the yellow bat and marks across our stomach, would go out there and just trash the opponents. Now, we never won a match because the match requires, I forget how many weight classes there are, but there's like a dozen, right? And if you only have like 4 or 5 scrappy kids, you can't win the match. Nor did we ever win any tournaments or anything like that, but we did put out quite a few state champs. I was one of them. And along the way, this really was more of a lesson in individual sports. And the first thing that I learned was that nothing was going to be handed out to me. And it was purely by desire and being willing to do 10 times more than what my opponent would do that led me to victory. I remember leaving practice and running home. Part of that's because my mom didn't show up on time. And we didn't live that far away, but along the way there was the track. And I ran track as well in the off season to stay in shape, but I'd stop into the track and the lights were out and I'd go out and I'd do push-ups and I'd do sit-ups and I'd run sprints and I'd do, standing up and I'd rehearse my moves inside my head because I wanted to be the winner. And so those lessons carried on with me for many, many years until I ended up going into SEAL training. Now, did you guys want to hear a couple stories about SEAL training? Okay. There I was. So SEAL training goes on in Coronado, California. Hasn't always, and I'm sure in the future they may change it. We just built a new base down in Imperial Beach, actually. But Coronado is a lovely place with a lovely beach, and if you've ever been down there, it's just absolutely fantastic. If you're not in Buds. But I came into Buds with the wrestling mindset of how to be a champion by myself. As an individual. And I knew that if I worked hard enough, I could do great things as an individual. But the lesson that I had yet to learn was about teamwork. And that's something that I'm learning a lot from this group in here because in water polo, you have to be a team to win. So we have this thing called Hell Week. And so the first 4 weeks of training at Buds, which is Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL School, is all just first phase. I mean, it's just beach sessions, wet and sandy, boats and log PT and things like that. And on the 4th week for us, we started something called Hell Week. Now, Hell Week, I think I was the last one to know exactly what was going on. I should have read the books, I didn't. So it turns out that we had to stay awake for a week, right? 5.5 days, something like that. And I think there was a nap on Thursday and a nap on Friday, something like that, to keep your brain from shutting down. So I entered into Hell Week thinking that, all right, this is my chance. This is what I'm going to, I've got to do this. And I can put forth 10 times the effort that the average human would because I know what it takes to win. And along the way, what I realized was that I would not be able to do this by myself. And it was Wednesday night, so we started on Sunday, and we went into Monday, and by Tuesday, everybody had already left. I mean, I think we had something like 278 students that joined, and maybe by Tuesday, we were down less than 100, and it would get smaller and smaller from that point on. So Wednesday, I mean, they're going to do studies on this in the future, I know. But we were so absolutely out of our mind, tired, and just zombies. And having gone back now, I've actually seen the trainees. They are zombies. But we're trudging along in training. They say this is the hardest training in the world. And Wednesday night, they have this thing called Camp Surf. What is Camp Surf, you might ask, Rob? Well, I'm glad you asked. Camp Surf is a fun little exercise where we take our boat oars and we dig the 20-foot berm into the ground with maybe let's call it a 30-foot pit. And we spend probably 8 hours digging with paddles. Why do we do this? So we can shape a bit of a pedestal in the middle with a moat around it so that we can climb up on top of the pedestal and tell the instructors jokes. This is the sick humor in the SEAL teams. So I remember being so cold and so miserable that we had reached midnight and we had what's called mid-rats. And for those of you in the military, you know what mid-rats are. But for us, we were getting 1 MRE. And every single calorie that you could put down was worth its weight in gold during this training. We're putting forth a lot of calories. So I remember sitting in the surf zone. And if you guys have been out on the beach, you know how it goes. The waves come up, and then every 5th wave, just depending on the sea state, is going to hit you, right? And I remember water pouring over my MRE, which is this plastic bag, and I'm trying to eat my food, and I'm shaking so much that I can't even get the food in my mouth, and there's seawater splashing into my food. It was a complete disaster. And I felt my body start to cringe and collapse, and my mental state was probably at its lowest point. And if anybody was going to quit, it would be at this moment. In order to quit, you have to walk up to the bell and ring it in shame. And people who ring the bell often recall this moment in their life as sort of a transition. It can be a terrible thing for a lot of people who go into training hoping that this is their one life achievement and end up failing. I was at that moment, and when it was time to return from the surf with an unfinished meal, I could barely get up. I was so cold. Any of you who have been surfing or diving without a wetsuit in low temperatures, and after a while your hands stop moving the way that they should, your lips, your voice, everything starts to slow down, and eventually your body begins to shut down. These are the stages of hypothermia. So I was able to get up and walk back to this mostly finished ditch inside the berm that we had dug for several hours. And this is where we would eventually get up and tell jokes while the instructors drank hot coffee in front of their fire. So at this point in time, the ditch was most of the way dug, but we had more work to do. So we grabbed our paddles, which, by the way, have no shape to them at all. They're sort of rounded on the outside, so it's impossible to shovel sand. It's a nightmare. And we began shoveling, and I could not stand up. And wouldn't you know, I fell to the ground, and I thought, well, this is it. Years of training, it's over. I could not move. I was going into hypothermia. And I thought, I just have to get up. I just have to move. I have to be able to get the blood flowing, right? If I get the blood flowing, I can pull myself out of this. This can't be the end. And it was my buddies, my teammates. At that moment, I realized I needed a team. It was my teammates that picked me up, guarded me visually from the instructors, because let me tell you, if the instructors saw that, they're going to come hound me. They're going to make sure that I don't continue. And they protected me, and they looked after me and helped me get rewarmed and back into the game. And at that moment, if it weren't for my teammates, I would have never became a Navy SEAL. So I have to give my hats off to my teammates because they carried me through that. Now there's lots of stories to continue with that. As you're in BUDS training, you know, you're under a boat, and I remember guys leaning left and right to see like who is carrying their weight. And if there was a guy that was ducking the boat, is what we call it, boat ducking, one of the guys is going to knock him out. One of them is going to turn around, because our careers, our lives, and everything relied on that team being able to perform together, uniformly. And what I realized with, you know, going through this entire process, running with boats on heads, running with logs, doing all this crazy PT, that if our team was unified and we were one element, working together in complete unison, we were unstoppable. But the minute that even just one person out of a 7-man team wasn't carrying his weight, the entire team felt it. And so for those reasons, I will always be a teammate. And I have a lot of respect for you guys out here having these solid teams. Don't ever forget your teammates. That's all I got. Thank you.
Rob, wait a minute. I want to 2 more minutes, Rob. Rob. He didn't speak it this year, but I'm going to. We got just a couple minutes. But I remember last year. Tell him about what is the boogeyman swim.
Of course.
He told it last year and he did it this year. Just quickly, the boogeyman swim, and you'll remember this. Yeah.
John, you're going to get your money out of me this year, aren't you? Just kidding. All right, so the boogeyman swim, this one's a little bit more of an advanced level swim after we've made it through BUDS. I just described Wednesday of Hell Week. You make it through BUDS, God willing. You make it to SQT, which is SEAL qualification training. And somewhere in that transition in between, you find yourself out on a place called San Clemente Island. Has anybody ever been out to the islands out there? Avalon, sailing? It's pretty legit. The bugging is great too, as John and I were discussing a minute ago. So the boogeyman swim, the SEAL instructors have such a great sense of humor. So what we do as a tradition, traditions are important, aren't they? We would watch a movie called Jaws. So we all got that's the only night during BUDS training that we were able to cozy up and watch a movie. So we watched this movie before we went out in the middle of the night and swam 5 miles off the coast of San Clemente Island. We have to swim in swim pairs in the Navy, or at least in BUDS. You have to have a swim buddy, no more than 6 feet away from you. That's one of the rules. And if you're found by yourself, it's a bad day. And it's not only a bad day for you, the whole class gets beat. Not good. You'll learn that lesson the first time. So when we're diving, and that rule does come from diving, when we're diving, we always have a slack line that's like 6 feet, right? And so we're attached to each other, and we're a dive pair, and we work together in a team. It's a very special type of swimming that we do. Subsurface swimming with a closed circuit breathing apparatus is our preference. Anyways, this is just a surface swim. We have fins, but it is at nighttime. And I remember our class honor man, which is the class votes on the most legit guy in the class, Brian Jewell, and he was a solid guy. But that night, he was my swim buddy, and he was not as solid as I would have hoped. We had a class, at that point in time, it must have been maybe 60 people total, maybe closer to 50 left in the class. They'd all made it through BUDS, they've all made it through Hell Week, and here we are about to do the infamous boogeyman swim. We're down at BUDS Beach, everyone's donning their equipment, which is a shorty wetsuit, and we have our fins and goggles. We're entering the water. The sea state was it was okay. It wasn't too bad. Temperature of the water is probably 65, and we're launching. And all we have to do is just swim this easy 5 miles off the coast, right? And don't die. So everyone launched because it pays to be a winner, and we're all hoping that we get there in an appropriate amount of time so that the instructor gods show favor on us and we don't continue to get beat. But for some reason, Brian was not able to get on his fin. And I remember looking past everyone as all the swim pairs left, and no one was there except for Brian and I. And I was thinking to myself, this is not good. This is not good at all. And for whatever reason, and if you guys have been out in the surf, you know it can get rough. It's tough to balance on one foot and put on a fin. For whatever reason, he could not get on that fin. And by the time he did get on that fin, there was absolutely no one in sight. And you can't see that far anyways because it's nighttime, but everyone's gone. So I looked to him and it's like, okay, let's do this. And we swam. And we swam as fast as we could to try to catch up to the crowd. And I remember reaching the kelp beds first. And there's a technique when you're swimming through the kelp beds because it feels like a monster is pulling you underwater. And you sort of swim with a slap. And you slap it down. And as long as you can hold down the kelp, it won't pull you under and drag you. And you're always carrying like a dive knife. The dive knife gets caught up in the kelp, and it's a real drag, literally. So we made it through the kelp beds, and we're probably halfway through the swim. You can see the moonlight off the coast, waves coming in, but for the most part, it's pitch black. We eventually made it to the last checkpoint, and I remember Instructor Young was out there on a John boat, and he was shocked, and he said, I'm not going to tell you what he said for the crowd here, but it's like, what are you guys doing? And the next thing I remember is getting hit in the face with chum. So we were in a great white feeding ground, and he was hitting us with buckets of chum. And what he said was, you guys should probably get to shore. I agreed. So we looked towards the glimmer of light down where the Bud's compound was, and we could see sort of that was our beacon. That's where we had to go. And so we immediately turned left and started swimming towards the ocean. And as we got closer, what I could make out was all of our classmates getting beat, waiting on us. And I looked over at Brian and I'm like, this is not good. This is not good at all. So eventually we made it to shore. We're showing up, Seaman Apprentice, Sweetman, swim complete. And they secured everyone and said, okay, get naked. So we took off our wetsuits. Everybody else took off. I'm sure they were happy that we were there so the beatings would stop. And we proceeded to lay in the surf. They call it surf torture. And you lay backwards with your head towards the surf, so you're kind of at a reverse angle, and the waves and the sand wash over and get in your eyes and your nose and your ears. And sometimes they'll make you rock backwards. We call those rocking chairs. So you really get that choking feeling. I remember being out there for a period of time. And, after the shaking stops, your body just relaxes. And I remember looking up at the sky, feeling so happy. And I was maybe curious why I wasn't shaking anymore. But at that moment, I was euphoric. I felt like I was kind of floating. And I thought that I was just going to float up into the sky. I was like, okay, God, I'm ready. I don't remember when we got secured, but I remember what I do recall was the look on my teammate's face as we came back around the back of the Bud's compound where they had the decontamination showers, and they just looked at us and were like, oh my goodness. And they grabbed us and they brought us back in. And at that point, I realized how bad it was. So That's the boogeyman swim. Good time. Probably wouldn't do it again, but there we have it.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you, buddy.
That's awesome.
That was one. That was 2 minutes. Remember.